Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Survivor 45 following the season premiere, and this was an interesting episode to say the least, both in terms of the actual gameplay that happened as well as the edit, as we're starting to see a set of contenders emerge and we're starting to get an idea of where these people are going, though there's still plenty of unknowns. But with all that out of the way, there are 18 players to look at, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 18, we have the boot from this week, but here we have Hannah. Now supposedly this was actually spoiled by the promos where, due to production's incompetence, they included shots from various challenges where Hannah was very clearly missing, so I was aware about this, but I didn't want to factor into my preseason rankings as I wanted that to be focused more so on the interviews and how I felt of these players inherently. But yeah, Hannah is the first boot here, and obviously she ends up quitting the game essentially. Now it's technically an unofficial quit as she was technically voted out, but even then Jeff made it a verbal vote, so much for that. And I feel like even based off the edit, it was pretty clear that the elements were just getting too much for her. All of her content here is talking about how like she was struggling out there. And literally we got that confessional right after the challenge where she pretty much says that she was glad that they lost the challenge as she hoped that they could vote her out. And for me, that was pretty much the death sentence for her, even without the promo. And in general, I feel like Hannah is a very weird first boot to talk about. As on one hand, she probably wasn't going to be the initial target, where it does seem like Emily or even Brandon were potential targets coming into this tribal, even if she hadn't quit. But at the same time, I mean, she wasn't really in that solid of a position based on what we saw, where it seemed like both her, Brandon, and Emily were kind of on the outs on that initial tribe. So I don't really know how well she would have done had she not quit, but it's pretty clear that it was just getting too much for her. And obviously she's out of the game now, so because of that, she is here number 18. And before we continue, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Russell Muscle TV, who I'm partnering up with this season to promote Idle Plays. Idle Plays is an online shop where you can purchase Survivor puzzles so you can practice them and be just like Carson from Survivor 44. We got all different selections here, including the fire puzzle, the snake to the top puzzle, the 5-piece puzzle that Spencer solved in 5 seconds from Survivor Cambodia, and more. If you want to take home Survivor puzzles made by superfans for superfans, feel free to click the link in the description and start shopping now. And with that, there are 17 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on their edit and current game position. But number 17, the person I believe is the least likely to win, isn't necessarily the one that got the most negative edit. However, I just feel like they're being set up for a downfall pretty soon, but here we have Caleb. Now again, I feel like if we're just looking at Caleb's edit, it's not inherently the most negative, like he wasn't dunked on the most compared to others. I feel like at the same time, like he doesn't really prop himself up at all, like where most of his content is him talking about how negative of a presence Emily is, and then later on talking about how Brandon would be a pretty easy vote, but at the same time we have Emily talking about how him and Sabrina are a pretty clear duo. And while I don't think Emily is likely to win, as we'll be talking about her very soon, I do feel like if Lulu goes by the tribal, which considering how much of a mess they are is pretty likely, I think what'll probably happen is that the likes of Emily, Sean, and Brandon will come together to break up that duo of Caleb and Sabrina. The fact that they're already being set up as a duo while not really getting a chance to establish themselves through their relationship is pretty bad in my eyes. And I feel like between the two, I just feel like Caleb is more clearly being set up for an early boot here. He's probably the one that's going to be targeting the most, whereas I feel like Sabrina is probably a bit more of a leader. Plus, I feel like Sabrina's edit has been a bit more well-rounded, whereas I feel like Caleb was just there to like narrate what was happening. So I feel like for those reasons, I feel like Caleb is being set up for a downfall here, where again, even though he's not being set up as being the one on the outs, I feel like he's being set up as the next one to go, which is why I do have him here at number 17. Now we're moving on to number 16, and we do have someone that was dunked on more than Caleb, but I feel like they have a bit more longevity within them, and here we have Sifu. Now again, Sifu was dunked on more in this episode than Caleb, where he was shown like trying to play like Tony, where he was running around looking for idols, him like spying on people, him thinking that he's getting away with all this stuff when in reality, everyone has already picked up on it. And we did kind of get a sense of this from his interview where he said that he wanted to play a Tony-like game and he's being pretty sloppy at it. So I feel like this was pretty interesting considering what he said in his interview there. And again, I feel like he's not really being set up here to win. Now, the reason I have him below some of these other players is I feel like outside of him, like talking about him being like a Tai Chi person as well as a musician, I feel like there just isn't anything positive with his edit to where I could see him being taken out early if his tribe ends up going to tribal. But at the same time, I feel like there's probably more of a chance he sticks around, both from the sense that he's on a stronger tribe than Caleb, and also the fact that he seems to be a bigger character than Caleb. But at the same time, I feel like there's just no way that he actually wins the game from this point, which is why he is here number 16. Now we're moving on to number 15, and we have someone that people were probably expecting to be at the bottom, but I have them a couple spots higher. But here we have Emily. And I think it's pretty clear that Emily's a pretty bad player. We did get a sense from her interview that she was going to be like this blunt and this much of an irritant, but I feel like the way it's playing out is a bit worse than I anticipated, and I feel like it's pretty clear that she was definitely in a lot of danger had the vote played out as normal, though at the same time there's a chance the vote could have flipped to Brandon. We don't have full clarity yet over where the vote would have been, but either way, like, a lot of her focus is on her, and I feel like it's pretty clear that she's probably not going to win. She's probably too big of a character, in my personal opinion. Though at the same time, I don't think she'll be the next to go off of Lulu. Where despite a lot of focus being on how much people don't like her, I feel like she's being set up more for like a Natalie Cole run, where she's probably going to be like a big pre-merge character, probably there to make some like really ridiculous moments, and then will eventually be taken out because, well, they're bad at the game. So I feel like that was enough to have them above the likes of Caleb or Sifu in the fact that, again, I feel like she's probably going to be a bigger character given her edit. And plus, I feel like there is at least some potential for her, like, having a storyline to where she could be a more major character across the season. Now, at the end of the day, I just don't see how this edit leads to a win. But I feel like the fact that she seems to be propped up a bit more, the fact that we at least get more of her perspective was enough to have her above the likes of Caleb, where I feel like Caleb is just like there to like get some minor setup and then will eventually be taken out. But at the end of the day, Emily's probably not winning, which is why she is here number 15. Now we're moving on to number 14, and we have another player kind of in line with the likes of Sifu and Emily, where they seem to get a decent amount of content, but also mostly bad content. But here we have Bruce, and I'm a bit disappointed by Bruce here, where obviously he was highlighted quite a bit given that he is the returning player here. He got a match chat, which obviously, if you've seen my previous videos, is a pretty good indicator in modern Survivor of doing well, or at least like narrowing it down to where you could do well. But I don't really give much credence to Bruce having a match chat, given that he was probably always going to get a match chat, given that he is this returning player. So I feel like that alone is probably not enough. But even within the match chat, he kind of gets undermined, where they show like him getting into an argument with Emily, like Emily basically undercutting everything that he's trying to say on the mat, where like he's talking about not having an advantage, only for Emily to say that he does have an advantage. You know, like, and I feel like if he were a more serious contender, they probably wouldn't show that argument, or at least like make more of a meal of highlighting Bruce's perspective on how dare Emily calls him out there. So I feel like that's not particularly great. But even beyond that, we get to the camp scene where he talks about wanting to be Uncle Bruce as opposed to the dad, only to immediately be undercut again, where he is shown then like giving orders, and we get a confessional from Kendra about how he just can't help himself, that he is going to be a leader and he's going to be giving orders and just going to be a dad. So I feel like all those things are pretty bad, and for me, that was enough to knock him out of winner contention. The reason I don't have him lower is, again, I feel like outside of that, like I think inherently he's probably better set up on his starting tribe, where despite the focus being on the Bellow woman, I think there is a chance that he could squeak on by for a bit. I think there is some chance that he could have a bit of longevity, but I feel like this premiere is pretty bad. He's probably not winning, and because of that, he is here number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13, and we have another player that I'm pretty disappointed by so far, but here we have Jake. Now, I was really hoping for a bigger episode from Jake. He seemed to be a good contender coming into the preseason. However, this premiere just didn't really do it for me. Now, yes, he did get that confession in the intro talking about how he lives with his grandmother and that he wants to move out, and like that was fine. But then the rest of the episode is pretty dry, where it's like, yeah, like he gets some content during the Sweat and Savvy challenge, but that was obviously necessary content. But even moving forward, we learned that Kendra wants to target Jake because he's a lawyer. And then we get the scene with Katora where he's explained to her like his job and like We get her talking about how he can be the little lawyer on the tribe, and all that's pretty bad, like enough to knock him out of winner contention for me. Now, again, like there's maybe could be a chance that he could get an uptick later on, but I feel like this premiere was, again, another pretty bad one. I feel like it wasn't as actively bad as someone like Bruce, where he was undercut several times, but I feel like the fact that Jake is already like being like shown in a more demeaning light, it was enough to have him here number 13. Now we're moving on to number 12, and these next two people are a bit more quiet in their edits, and that's why I had them a bit lower. But number 12, I did decide to go with Brando. Now, Brando did get a bit more content than the next person, but that's because they had to get that content. They were part of the Sweat and Savvy challenge, and plus their tribe as a whole got more screen time, to where there was probably more of an excuse to highlight Brando, but they just don't. And I feel like that was enough to highlight to me that he's just not going to be that major of a character across the season. Where now, even if he gets more content in the future, I feel like this premiere will really hold him back. And again, like they could have highlighted him here, but I feel like the fact that he didn't was enough to knock him down for me. And because of that, he is here at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11, and we have someone pretty similar, but here we have Jemiah. And again, Jemiah is pretty similar to Brando, had a pretty quiet premiere. Her only confessional came right after the reward challenge, where she got the confessional explaining how they're the strong tribe and it's great to win the first challenge. Again, pretty baseline stuff. She doesn't really get anything outside of that, enough to knock her out of winner contention for me. But the reason I have her above Brando is that her tribe as a whole got less screen time than Brando's. So I feel like there's more of an excuse over why she didn't get much content. But again, the fact that they didn't go out of our way to show her more was enough to show to me that, again, she's just not going to be a major character. And because of that, she is here number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we have someone that got a bit more content, but as a whole, I was pretty underwhelmed by their premiere. And here we have Sabrina. Now, Sabrina did get some stuff at the beginning where she got to talk about comparing Survivor to a boot camp, and she's not really bothered by the tough conditions. And we see her around camp sort of being the leader and in general fulfilling like the expectation that I had from her in the preseason. But again, we don't really get that much. And I think the most damning thing came when we saw Emily explaining like her relationship with Caleb. And the fact that we don't really see this from either Caleb or Sabrina's perspective is pretty bad in my personal opinion. It just makes me feel like the next time I go to Tribal that she's probably going to be on the outs, even though they are being kind of set up now as being like this tight duo. And the fact that we don't get their perspective means that I think they're going to lose out on that battle. Now, again, between Caleb and Sabrina, I think I would lean towards Sabrina staying over Caleb. But even outside of that, I was a bit underwhelmed by the personal content there. I feel like a lot of her content around camp was talking about how bad of a presence Emily is, which isn't great in my personal opinion. It just feels kind of baseline. But really, I think Sabrina's edit was just kind of fine, where, again, it's not the worst edit in the world, but I feel like it's not really leading to a win. I don't really see winner when I see Sabrina. So I feel like for that reason, I can't really have her any higher than number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have another player who I feel like their edit has been mostly baseline, but here we have Sean. And again, I feel like his edit hasn't been anything too spectacular. Again, mostly standard confessionals about how they need to build a shelter, and he gets to talk a little bit later on about talking to Sabrina, about Emily being sus of her. You have like just not very exceptional stuff to where I can't really have Sean as a top contender because of that. Really, the main thing keeping him this high on the list is his get confessional at the beginning, where he gets to talk about making up for lost time. But even then, it's not even like a full-on confessional. It's more like him like getting to talk towards the end of the intro. But it's at least something. It's better than nothing. And aside from that, I don't really have anything to knock him down to a degree. But I feel like with him lacking any substantial content, I feel like 9 is about as high as I can put him. Now we're moving on to number 8, and there's definitely an argument for this person being lower. However, after thinking about it, I did decide to give them the edge, and here we have Austin. And I feel like the main focus with Austin is in this episode was him searching for idols and coming across the Beware advantage, which definitely feels circumstantial to a degree, to where had he not come across the Beware advantage, how much content would he really have gotten? So I feel like that alone is probably a reason why I should have him lower. However, I feel like he got a couple bits outside that, like he got a confessional in the intro talking about like how he can't believe it's happening, which, you know, like you can take her to believe it. And he also like gets to dig at Sifu when he's looking for idols, claiming that he's been searching for idols himself, even though people have caught Sifu for it. And he even gets to say that it's lame to play it safe. So I feel like those were at least some minor things I could prop him up with. But at the end of the day, I feel like he was lacking quite a bit in personal content. I feel like we could have gotten quite a bit more from him, to be honest. But I feel like it was those minor things that put him a bit higher, and because of that, he is here number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and we have another player whose edit has been a pretty minor for the most part, but I feel like this person's edit was a bit more unnecessary. But here we have Julie. And again, Julie's edit here is mostly quiet as well, where her only content comes during the camp scene where she's talking about how she's going to hide the fact that she's a lawyer. And I found that to be a bit unnecessary. I feel like we didn't really need to learn that in this episode. But the fact that they went out of their way to show Julie is at least something. I feel like it's more than some of the other people we already talked about. But at the end of the day, I feel like there just isn't too much outside that to prop her up with. And I feel like with other players, potentially learning to be themselves a bit more that we'll be getting to soon, I feel like the fact that Julie didn't really have much setup for a storyline beyond that was a reason that I had her a bit lower. But again, that minor thing was enough to make her stand out, and because of that, she is here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and I feel like we're starting to get into some of the contenders here. I feel like these next two are not top contenders, but I feel like I could see a world where they could enter top contention. But at number 6, we do have Brandon. Now I can definitely see a case for Brandon being lower here. I feel like there's definitely a world where I could see him falling off, sort of similar to Matthew from 44, where he was a major character during a lot of the pre-merge, but obviously his injury eventually caught up with him despite his edit, and obviously it just led to his downfall here. And I could see a similar fate with Brandon here, where obviously he's been overcome both by his anxiety, but also his really blatant challenge weakness, which did catch me a bit off guard. I knew he wasn't in the best shape, and plus he was obviously very anxious, talked a lot about in his preseason interview. But I feel like it's just played out much more than I anticipated. And I could see a world where, despite his strong edit, those things are just right in front of us and they just never go away. But at the same time, I could see him just being a major character across the season, sort of having this journey style of edit where he eventually learns to overcome a lot of his anxiety and is able to be a force within the game. But the problem with that is that people with journey edits very rarely go on to win this season, where so much of it becomes more about them growing and then eventually becoming a big threat, more so than them actually winning by the end of it. So I feel like that's going to be a pretty big concern either way. But I still feel like Brandon at least has plenty of setup for him to be a big character. I feel like he's one of these people that has some setup to a storyline, which is more than I can say about a lot of the other players left here. Now, in terms of his position, he's obviously in a pretty bad spot. He obviously could have been the first boot had the vote proceeded as normal, and he lost his closest ally in Hannah. But again, I feel like based off the way the edit is portraying things, I feel like Brandon will eventually find his footing, and I'm sure he'll be able to survive the next tribal, which, considering Lulu is not a very good tribe in challenges, I feel like that'll be coming sooner rather than later. So I feel like I'm willing to give Brandon the benefit of the doubt here. I feel like we are leaning towards him being a major character, both with him focusing quite a bit on his character early on. Also the fact that he got a Matt chat, the only other player aside from Bruce to get a Matt chat. So I feel like that also can't be ignored. And just him being a pretty clear presence across the season. But I feel like those red flags were enough to where I can't really have him in top contention, as I feel like there's just too much variance with where he could go. And even if he gets the upper end, it'll be hard for me to see how he gets past the stigma that so many other people that have gotten journey eds have gotten. So I feel like for that reason, 6 is about as high as I can put him. Now we're moving on to number 5, and this is another borderline top contender for me, where this person probably didn't have the flashiest premiere, but I feel like they got enough there to make me seriously consider them. But here we have D. And I think Dee had a solid episode here, where early on she gets to talk in the intro about how she was made for this, how she's going to play like this is her only chance. I felt like that was a very good line. But then later on in the episode, when we're seeing Sifu do all of his Tony antics, we see Dee being the one to call him out. She says that she doesn't like Sifu spying on them, but then she takes it one step further, and that her mother called her a fireball growing up, and that in the real world she would probably lash out at someone like Sifu, but she needs to hold it in. But even so, she can't trust Sifu. And I felt like that was a level of complexity that we probably didn't need, but the fact that we got it shows that D should be strongly considered here. Now, yes, it's still not a ton. I wish we would have gotten a bit more from her, but I feel like those things were enough to where I had to seriously consider D, and I could see her like getting a stronger edit in the future. So I feel like it's for all those reasons that I have D this high on the list, but I feel like the top four like have more blatant setups for a future winners edit that leaves D here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and for me, these 4 are the top contenders. I could very well see one of these 4 winning the game based solely on the premiere, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But number 4, I did decide to go with Kendra. And for me, it was a debate between Kendra and the next person. However, the reason I went with Kendra a bit lower is I feel like her content, like, while it's still like relatively strong, wasn't quite as strong as the other players that we talked about. Where, yeah, she gets to talk about being obsessed with her tribe, she believes that they're balanced, and she's the one that gets to set up, like, her wanting to work with the women as a way of counteracting the trend that we saw in 43 and 44 of women going out in the pre-merge. So I feel like that was pretty good. She gets, again, that content there of her alliance with Katora and Kelly, which, funnily enough, is the only real alliance that gets any meaningful screen time, I guess, aside from the duo of Caleb and Sabaya. So I feel like that's something at least. But again, I feel like compared to the top 3, it wasn't quite as strong. But with that said, I could also see Kendra shooting up in future weeks. I feel like Kendra did get a decent amount of setup there. Not to mention she was the one to call up Bruce for him wanting to be the leader, even though we saw Bruce saying that he didn't want to be the leader. I feel like that was also good content for her. So I walk away from the premiere pretty surprised by Kendra. I feel like she could do pretty well based off her edit. But again, I feel like the top 3 had stronger edits in my view, which is why she's here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and we have another player that I had pretty low in the preseason, but their premiere was pretty solid. And here we have Drew. And again, I came to the season expecting Drew to not have the same level of success as Carson, particularly given the first impressions that they gave off, where they came off as pretty sketchy. But again, so far, I mean, he had a solid premiere. Like, he got a pretty good introduction. He got the first confessional talking about how he's one of the smartest players in Survivor, but he also knows there's sophistication in the game. But really, the main reason that he's this high is his introduction at the camp scene, where he breaks down his identity. He talks about how there's Drew and Basile, how like they're different personalities, and that in the middle there's this well-rounded, confident person, and he'll feel like it'll work out for him. And to me, like, that was very good content from him, very good personal content, a very solid introduction, and one that was pretty unnecessary considering how little screen time most of his tribe got. The fact that they went out of it their way early on to showcase Drew and giving him this content is very good. With that said, we didn't really see much of his relationships, and we didn't really see him actually gaming, where that's pretty much the only content that it got. But considering that the rest of his tribe didn't get nearly as significant content as he did, I feel like that made him really stand out. And I feel like we'll probably see more of his relationship in the future episode, but the fact that we didn't see them highlighted here is a bit of a red flag. But again, I feel like with how weird this edit was, I feel like Drew really stood out. I feel like he's going to be a pretty major character in the season, and because of that, I do have him here number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and both these players are on the same tribe, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But number 2, I did decide to go with Kelly, my winner pick here. And I think so far, Kelly is looking pretty good. I feel like she got a pretty decent introduction, talking in the intro about her being a nurse and how people assume nurses are nice, when in reality, she's like ready to backstab people. But then more importantly, like, we see like her relationships established, where she gets to talk about connecting with Kendra and how she knows that Kendra's different from her and that she normally wouldn't interact with someone like that, given that's not who she is. But they're vibing regardless. And obviously we see that relationship get formed. We see the women coming together to build this alliance. You can tell that they're supposed to be taken seriously. I feel like on the whole, it's pretty solid in terms of content for Kelly. I feel like she is being set up pretty well. However, I feel like the number 1 person got more content than her, whereas I feel like Kelly definitely felt a bit restrained with the amount of screen time that she was getting, to where like I wish we got a bit more from her. But I feel like as it is, it's all very strong. I could see Kelly doing pretty well based off this edit. And because of that, I do have her this high at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person that I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 45 right now is Katora. And I feel like Katora got the most well-rounded edit out of anyone in this episode. She gets personal content talking early on about how she studied this game and that she knows she'll be voted out early if she's smart. So she's going to hide the fact that she's a lawyer. And then later on, we see that followed up upon where we see Jake being targeted due to him being a lawyer. And we see her sort of passing that target on to him by talking to him about being a lawyer and that she's happy that Jake's willing to take all this heat off of her. I feel like that's pretty solid. And the fact that she gets credit for it is pretty good. And then she also gets strategic content where she gets to build that alliance with the other women on our tribe, Kelly and Kendra. And yes, while like Kelly and Kendra were shown more with the personal relationships, Katora is very much included in that. So I feel like, oh, that's pretty good. I feel like Katora is probably the person that I feel like I was the most satisfied with in terms of their edit. I feel like the other top contenders we talked about were either lacking in some regard, where I feel like Kelly wasn't getting as much screen time as I would like. I feel like Kendra, like, kind of has this, like similar vibe to what I would get from Carolyn, someone that is probably going to be a big character later on, but maybe not as goofy. And I feel like Drew is someone that got a very good personal introduction, but is lacking in the relationships and the actual dynamics of his tribe. But I feel like Katora like got just enough to where we have a very good sense of her as a player. I feel like I'm the most confident about Katora after this episode, and it's for that reason that I have her here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps out with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the Power Rankings again, so stay tuned for that. Big Brother 25 is still ongoing, so you can expect weekly Power Rankings and live streams for that, so you can stay tuned for that. Amazing Race is now in full swing, so you can expect weekly Power Rankings of that show as well. I also have a Patreon. If you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And if you haven't already, you can join the Discord server as well by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.